Hello, and thank you all for joining us this evening for the very first CWU Blue Book Club book discussion. My name is Chris Reiber, and I am the Assistant Director for Chapter and Regional Programming for the Alumni Association of Case Western Reserve University. It is quite a privilege for me to share with you some incredible American history, 160 years of history, in fact, especially during Black History Month. A few quick housekeeping items. Your microphones have been muted by default to reduce background noise during our discussion. You're welcome to submit questions via the chat function. To test out the chat feature, I'd like to see where you all are joining us from today. So if you could please share that in the chat. We have some questions that were submitted in advance, and we'll do our very best to get to as many questions as we're able. If you haven't already picked up a copy of Designing Victory, you can get your copy directly from Act 3 Creative at designingvictory.com. And also as a thank you for joining us this evening, we will be able to, Mr. Madison has graciously agreed to provide everyone with an inscribed book plate that you'll be able to attach to your copy of the book. So we will send out some information on how to obtain that after the event's conclusion. So without delay, I'd like to start off introducing our first featured author. Today's author is Robert P. Madison, a CWU Emeritus Trustee and alumnus from Western Reserve's School of Architecture, class of 1948. He is an award-winning architect and fellow of the American Institute of Architects, an honor that fewer than 5% of the more than 80,000 AIA members. Mr. Madison, a World War II veteran and a great-grandson of slaves, opened Robert P. Madison International in 1954. It was the first African-American owned architecture firm in the state of Ohio and just the 10th in the nation. His work can be seen around the world and across the city of Cleveland, including the Lewis Stokes wing of the Cleveland Public Library, the Rocket Mortgage Fieldhouse, First Energy Stadium, and he collaborated with I.M. Pei to create the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Mr. Madison's memoir, Designing Victory, which we'll be discussing this evening, showcases the drive and brilliance which allowed him to thrive despite attempts to derail his life because of the color of his skin. Mr. Madison, thank you for being here tonight.
Well, welcome, and I'm grateful for your asking me to be here. It's nice to be able to talk.
Well, I don't know that there's a better question to begin with than why a memoir? What began the process for you of writing down your experiences?
Well, that's excellent. I thought about that. I got a copy of your question to ask, and I thought about it for a long time. And I remember that architects write. They do that because they want to record what mistakes they have made on these buildings they've designed. And so during the early years of my practice, I would go on vacation. And when my wife and children were out in the beach, I was out writing something that had happened during the past week or two, a year or two, whatever. And about sometimes later, I really began to think about my great-grandparents, and I started writing even more. And then I put it aside for about 4 years and get back and write some more stuff about what I'd done. And then I retired, time to hang them up. And so during retirement, I said, gee whiz, I think I keep on writing. So I was doing this primarily because I wanted my children and my great children to understand just a little bit about what Dad had been through and things like that. And as I began to write more and more, I said, well, wait a minute, why don't we write a book? And so I asked Act 3 and a group of men that I knew, good writers, to help me with it. And I started writing this book, and I said, I really want my children to understand what life was like when I was coming along. And I was born in 1923. And those were days when it was not easy to understand what was happening in America. But I thought I'd write, and as I wrote more and more, I began to say, well, gee whiz, I've been practicing architecture here now for almost 50, 60 years. Why don't I really write more about it and just include it and let my children have an opportunity to see what I've done? And then if it gets much more acceptable, whatever they do with it after that is wonderful. But primarily, architects do like to write, and recording things that have happened is important. And I really got involved when I went down. I think you have a question about this, about going down to Millbury, Alabama, and being with my great grandmother who was born in slavery. Does that answer that question?
Absolutely, absolutely. And speaking of your great grandmother, so the opportunity to meet your grandma Land, as you referred to her, she so many of your and so many of your relatives when you're there in Mobile, it was such a joyous and impactful experience. But it was also marred by your first experience with discrimination. Could you tell us about that experience, and how did meeting your grandmother shape the perspective that you had on formal education versus what success can really look like?
Well, my father was from Mobile, Alabama. He was born there, but he migrated, not migrated, but he went to a private school in Selma, Alabama, where he met my mother later on. They got married, and then to Howard University. So he was a graduate of the engineering department, engineering school at Howard. But when I began to write about uh, the things that had happened to me, and see, my father had a difficult time. He's really my hero, but he was working as a professor back in those days because people didn't hire black engineers. Who ever heard of a black engineer? We don't hire people like that. He was teaching at Selma University in Selma, Alabama, and subsequently to Benedict College in Columbia, South Carolina, when I was 7 years old. Then we moved back we moved to Washington D.C. when he got a job in the War Department. He was the first African American to be hired as a civil engineer in the War Department of the federal government. Then the Depression hit, and when the Depression came along, the last to be hired is the first to be fired. And my father was released from his job at the War Department, and he never worked again as a professional engineer with a company. But I think your question was, how did I begin to talk about my great grandmother? Well, I guess in 1936 it was, yeah. We were having a difficult time, meaning the family was really having a tough time. My dad didn't have a job. Here's a man who's got a college degree. He was driving a taxi cab and things like that, mowing grass for people, which was very resentful and stuff like that. But we they said, okay, well, look, let's send me and my brother down to Millbury, Alabama, to be with my great grandmother. It happens that my grandmother, my father's mother, was very insistent in having us, our boys, come down and live in Mobile. As a matter of fact, she wanted us to move down there. So we went down, Julia and I went down that summer, and we were told that Grandma Land lived up in Millbury. We went to Mobile to Millbury. And Millbury, Alabama was where we were going to go to see her. So on one Friday, that's right, morning, June and I and my grandmother, my father's mother, got in the car and drove to Millbury, Alabama. That was a drive that took about 4 hours. It was started out on a highway, then a dirt road, then just pock marks all in the streets, and we passed the houses of black people lived in that area, which were some were not very well taken care of, some were better off, some were propped up on blocks, and It was some of the worst examples of what you can find in the South of America, in the places where African Americans or Black people, we were called colored people those times, that they lived. And as we were driving along, it took us 3 hours to get there from Mobile to Millbrae. As we were driving along these different roads and different areas, we had to drive through forests of trees to open space, and we saw colored people. I will use the word colored because that was what we were called back in those days, NAACP. And we saw these, people colored who lived in these areas, and they were some very disheveled, very sad-looking places of habitation that these people lived in. And we began to wonder if my great grandmother had lived in this kind of place also. But as we got on and on and on, and finally we came upon a clearing, and as we were passing through those roads, we saw snakes and animals and all sorts of wild animals and things. And Julie and I were getting very worried. What's this all about? Where are we? And finally, we arrived at the homestead of Louise Land, which was my great grandmother on my father's side. And what was interesting was that her house had a white picket fence around it, very well fenced in, and there was a log cabin, as most of them were, propped up on rocks as they were, and very well kept. And the grounds were, and we were very relieved because she was not a sharecropper. She was able to plant her own food and grow her own meals and stay in that house by herself. She was at that time about 74, 75 years old. Of course, my father said she was older, but I understand that she was born she was a slave, but when she left, when the Emancipation Proclamation came, they set the people free. Well, where were they going to go? They had no place to go. So my great grandfather and mother settled in on the land, which was a plantation that my great grandmother had lived in. And we met her, and it was, one in an event I will never forget or even recall because I sat there and I thought about this was the fact that this lady was a slave, and her ancestors were born in slavery. They were my kinfolk. They'd come from Africa. And I sat there and thought about it, and Julie and I just wondered about it. What was it all like? And it happens that Louise Land, my great grandmother, was spry little lady, about 4 feet 10 inches tall, very thin, light skinned color. She was not black. She had light skin. And she owned this place, and she was proud of it. And we stayed there for Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, came back Monday morning. That event and the pride that she had in maintaining this little plot of land, 40 acres, I think it was. She had a mule, and my cousin Louise stayed with her because she was a daughter of Louise Land, and she lived by herself, of course. But it was an event that I will never forget. On Friday morning, we got up at 5 o'clock in the morning. But I got to tell you about that first night we were there. We arrived about 3 o'clock, and as usual, we had some coffee and cocoa and donuts on the front porch as the people were talking. And people in the neighborhood, meaning that there were not any organized, civilized society like we have now, but we had a house. They came by, and once the word got out that Cousin Robert's children were here, they all flocked in because they wanted to see Cousin Robert. That's my father. Cousin Robert had left the South, and gone up north. They were going up north, went up to get a real education. He happened to study at Howard University and got a degree in engineering from there. So they all came by that night and wished us well, and we had just a wonderful time. And we had dinner about 5 o'clock, and we were sitting in there talking. I was trying to understand what they were saying because their English was not what mine is like, of course. And it took a little time to get accustomed to their drawl, if you would call it that, or the accent, and their use of language, the use of words. But finally, about 6 o'clock, we were really beginning to get involved with them and talking about what happened 10 years ago and stuff like that. And then we saw about 5:30, we saw the sun beginning to set. And all of a sudden, we saw my grandmother get up and start, and Lucy, get up and start closing the windows and fixing up the shades and serving. What is going on here? Well, it's time to go to bed. I said, what do you mean time to go to bed? Well, there were no lights. There was no electricity in the house. There were no street lights. And so when it got dark, they went to sleep. Julian and I, coming from the city, thought this was most unusual. So, but we went to sleep that night. And for the first time in our lives, we heard the sounds of the night, horses neighing, cows mooing, all kinds of birds and bats and making their noises at night. And we finally went to sleep about 3 o'clock in the morning because about 2 o'clock, I guess. Because at 5 o'clock a.m., my grandmother came and said, time to get up. We said, time to get up? Wait a minute. Well, the sun had just risen. So they got up when the sun rose and went to sleep when the sun went down. And we got up that day and started going to the fields. We went to have breakfast. And you talk about fresh eggs, they were just out of the hatched. I went out there myself and was able to collect some eggs, which I had never done before in my life. And she had the usual breakfast, which was just sumptuous. They could really cook. And then we went to the field. My great-grandmother, who was a slave, was out there behind this plow and a horse. And we were making these burrows in the ground and putting seed in there. But that was in the morning. And then at noon, we came back to the house, had lunch, then went back to the field. In the back to the field, we began to secure the foods that have been grown and brought it back to the house to eat and to even sell. That was the first night. Second night, second day, Saturday, my niece said she was going to town to get some staples. And I said, oh, fine. She said, you can go with me, Bob. And I said, okay, fine, I'll go. Told Julian not to come. He was too young. I was 13. I think Julian was 10. So she put the stick with a bag on the end of it. She had a pair of sandals on, and we started walking to the store. And we walked about, I don't know how many miles, but we walked for 3 hours to get to the country store. Wow. Outside of Millbury, Alabama. And she bought what staples we need, which is sugar and flour, things that they are able to grow on the plant, on their house, on their farm. Brought it back, and then we had a good dinner. Then the next day, we had to get ready for Sunday, which meant that this was Saturday, which meant that she started washing clothes and getting ready for the Sunday go-to meeting, and being sure that Julie and I were all set to go and all ready. Then we went. Sunday morning came, and sure enough, put on our Sunday go-to meeting clothes, they called. We had a nice suit there, and everybody was dressed. And we went to this place, which was a clearing, and there's a great big tent that the men folks had put up that morning. And that was where we were waiting to have services. We looked down the road and we heard, he's coming. And we looked up, we saw 2 men on horses, one white horse and one brown skin horse, riding up as fast as they could. And that was the preacher. This was the preacher who was go from plantation to plantation, the whole service. So he got there about 10 o'clock, We had Sunday school. Then after Sunday school, we had church, and he started preaching. And he was one of those preachers that you read about in history, where, where they were really shout and scream. But it was good. And after his preaching, then we had lunch. Everybody brought this wonderful food. Everybody had a basket full of food, all kinds of wonderful chicken, rabbits, anything you want to eat. Had dinner there, and then we went back to preaching for the Sunday service. And all day long we were in church. The children had about 2 hours to play with each other. Julie and I joined the other people, and then we had the ending service. And then at about dusk, the preacher lined up on the horses and they left us. That was the circuit rider, as they were called. He'd be back in 2 weeks, so he came to this place in 2 weeks. Then we went to sleep that night, and next day we got up and time to go back to Mobile, Alabama. So Grandma came up, Grandma Julia Craig came up, picked us up. We went on back to Grandma to Mobile. On the way in, Grandma said she had to buy some shoes for Julian. So we stopped by this department store, and we went to this department store in Mobile, Alabama. And I was sitting there waiting with her. And all of a sudden, I got up and started walking. They started screaming, "Bobby, stop, 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 stop." I said, and all of a sudden, all the clerks came running towards me. I said, what's going on here? Well, it happens that I was thirsty, and I had seen 2 drinking fountains over there by the wall, and I went over to get myself a drink of water. I saw the sign, one said colored, one said white. Well, I didn't know what white fountain looked clean to me, so I started taking a drink. That was my mistake, because I was not supposed to drink from the white fountain, although it was next to the black fountain, colored people's fountain. I learned that lesson pretty fast, because that was the first time I'd ever seen my grandmother really enraged. She was really frightened, because she told me later that they could have taken me out there and that'd been the end of me, because I was drinking the wrong fountain. That was my really fascinating introduction to the Deep South. And we came on back to Mobile, and we stayed there for a little while longer, then back to Cleveland, then back to Washington, D.C., where I was listening. So I guess I'll wait for the next question. I hope that's all right.
Absolutely. It was a scary situation, and it was clear from the engagement with your family that your family meant so much to not just your extended family, but to your immediate family. And you had mentioned how your father had to take so many jobs beneath his capabilities as an engineer, and so to help find work, you and your family headed back to your birthplace in Cleveland in 1937. And you mentioned that your father's education, your mother's education played a big part in instilling how important it is to being highly educated themselves. So how did your time at East Tech set you on the path towards the halls of some of the most premier schools in architecture in the world?
Well, I think, first of all, before we left Mobile, Alabama, as you say, I was in Washington, D.C. I came up to Cleveland because in Washington, D.C., there were 3 schools for Black people, colored people: Armstrong, Dunbar, and Cardozo. Dunbar was if you wanted to be a doctor or lawyer or something like that, you go Dunbar. Cardozo, if you were being in the clerical field of being in stenographer, working in an office, something like that. And Armstrong was for the trades, as they called it, where they had carpentry and mechanical, not mechanical engineering, but just mechanical, running pipes and plumbing and stuff like that. Well, they didn't have any practical studies of architecture for any color student in any school. So my mother, first of all, I want to know when I became an architect. My father had a tough time. My mother said, that's not right. So it happens that when I was in elementary school, I came home. I was in Selma. We were living in Selma, Alabama. And I brought this drawing I had made in school to my mother and showed her. She says, "Son, you're gonna be an architect one day." I said, "Really?" I didn't have this slightest idea what an architect was or what he even did. But I said, "Okay, Mom." And for the rest of my life, that's all I've ever wanted to do and be. So when we got to Washington D.C. and they had these wonderful schools, Dunbar, Armstrong, Mendoza, but no place did they have a course in architecture for colored people. So it came to East Tech, and that was where at East Tech, uh, at that time, East Tech was a premier school in the country. It taught Latin, French, German, anything, engineering, architecture. It was a tremendous school, and it was east side of Cleveland, so that was called East Tech. There was a similar school on the west side called West Tech. So I enrolled at. We went to East Tech. I had to be pass the exam to get in there, and sure enough, I was able to pass the whatever it took to get into East Tech. And I graduated. There were about 3,000 graduating students at East Tech, of which about 60 were black at that time, graduating, about 3,000. And I do remember one thing here about it. They used to have an arts prize, no, a mathematics prize for the best student in mathematics for the entire 3 years. And they said that Bob Madison was there, but he had tied with another student for the math prize. So they said, okay, well, we would have a test off, which means that Sinkovich was his name. He and I arrived at East Technical High School on a Saturday morning to take this exam to find out which one of us was the best math student in the 3 years to get the award. So we took this 3-hour examination in mathematics. And that was the last we heard of it. I said, well, you know what? If I won, I'm sure I won, because if he had won, they certainly would announce his graduation. But they didn't make any announcement about any award at all for the math prize at East Technical High School back in those days. I said, okay, well, yeah, we'll take it. I'll show you later. So I got to Howard University and started studying architecture. I must tell you that my mind is not as acute as it used to be. Was that the end of the question?
Yes.
Phrase the question.
Yes, you did a wonderful job with that. And then while you were at Howard University, you also had joined the ROTC, which ultimately ended up in your education being interrupted by World War II.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, that's good. You go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, no problem. And
well,
so you'd mentioned, in the book that, as so many changes come because of war, you yourself had mentioned that it made you a man of the world. What changes did you experience, and what changes did you see more broadly, taking place in the country at that time?
Well, back in 1936 and 37, we talked about equality, but there was no equality. There was still. I remember going to the South, and when we got to Cincinnati, we had to change trains and get on the colored train, and you're coming back. On the colored train, you get to Cincinnati train and be on the other any train coming up north, and that was the way it was. And there were not very few jobs for black people. My father, who had really was a brilliant man, he was a civil engineer, and things were not good to him. I really regret so much of what happened to my father, because he became discouraged and depressed, etc. But during that period at East Tech, at Howard University, I liked it very much. I enjoyed Howard. It was first time I'd ever been, first of all, living by myself. I had dormitories, of course, with men. And I was 17 years old, and I got to know a lot of classmates there. And I was studying architecture because my mother had said back in those days, son, you're going to be an architect. And I said, okay. So I started studying architecture. Uh, Howard was a wonderful place at that time. I had never been in an environment that was so heroic and so wonderful. And at that time, Howard University had more PhDs on its faculty than some of the other schools in America except Harvard. And that was because Black scholars, Rhodes Scholars, been all over, they were not permitted to teach in the schools except in color schools. So at Howard University, I had more PhDs teachers there because they couldn't do anything else. And we got wonderful education at Howard. That was, I think, an experience, and I really grew up then because I was on my own, and I had a tuition scholarship and room, but not board. So I had to find a way to eat, and it was still a very tough time. But I got a job working in the hotels in downtown Washington D.C. because the war was just about ready to begin, and all these girls had come from all over to do clerical work in the Washington D.C. and they stay in these hotels. Well, we had to feed them, not feed them, but I got a job as a busboy. So it was great because I could eat then. Not only eat then, but I was able, and I did. Every night when I got through my session, I collected up the food for me and for all my classmates. Not all of them, but my roommate and a couple of guys. So we ate very well from that jobs I had working at the hotel for these people. But that was the way it was, and I think that the other thing was that, you see, there was no understanding that Black men would be fighting the war as equals. My father was a first lieutenant. Now, he had gotten a degree in 1920. This is 40. He's still a first lieutenant. They never promoted him. And so when he reported for duty, they sort of sideways gave him a little job. Said, okay, then they retired him 6 months later because he was over age and grade. He was in his 40s then, I guess, and he was too old to be a first lieutenant. You get that, my friend? So from there, I went to ROTC. I was an ROTC cadet, and when the war came along, we were drafted. But that group of students at Howard who were taking ROTC were kept together and sent in a group. We went from there to Fort Myers, and then from Fort Myers to Camp Croft, and from Camp Croft back to Howard, waiting for OCS to open up. That would be at Fort Benning, Georgia. So they kept this group of us, 21 of us, who were officer candidates for the military. And so in 1937, no, 40, in 1943 it was, I'm sorry, 43, yeah, because the war started in 41. We were then ordered to go to Fort Benning, Georgia, to go to officer candidate school. And I went there, 21 of us went to all Black. They had to keep us together. They had to wait until a barrack was empty before they put these Black, there was no integration at all there, no mixes in anybody in it. So we were in this barracks, and all Black were in that barrack, going to officer candidate school. And we were there for 17 weeks. We were called the 17-week wonders. We were officers of the United States government. So I graduated in June of that year, as did the others. And it happens though I was by myself because after I was there for 4 weeks, I contracted some illness in my throat, and I went to the nursery where they fix you up. Infirmary it's called, and they patched me up, but I had lost 1 week. And so for the rest of the time I was on my own. They gave me a special room that I slept in by myself because there was no getting together with blacks and whites at that time. As a matter of fact, I went into Columbus, Georgia, only once. All the soldiers would go into Columbus, Georgia, from Fort Benning on the weekend because that's where the girls were and stuff like that. But they would not let you black. You had to travel by yourself. You had to travel in groups. There would be no black. There was no bus or no truck in which blacks and whites would ride together. So we had to wait till we got one truck with enough black folks to go into Columbus, Georgia. And so after I said, well, no, I don't need this. This is just too much effort just to go into town to have a little sandwich, eat some food. So I didn't go into Columbus anymore. I then when I was had this tonsillitis, and I was removed from my group. I was by myself. So they put me in a special, you know, bunk bed in a special part of the barracks, and there I was for the next. I think it was about 5 more weeks I was there. Nobody spoke to me. They didn't talk to me. In the evening, I'd go out and walk after dinner, walk into the forest and just talk to the birds and the flowers and come back. But no one spoke to me at all during that period except in class. And I passed, and I was then sent to Fort Huachuca, Arizona. I must have done pretty good because they recommended me to be a battalion intelligence officer, S2. So I went to Fort Huachuca, Arizona, as the S2, as the intelligence officer. And I was then put into the 92nd Infantry Division, Buffalo Soldiers, which we're very proud of. They had a tremendous history, the Buffalo Soldiers did. And we were really excited about fighting. Of course, it was difficult because there was no state in the Union. Now, Fort Huachuca is about 10 miles from the Mexican border in Arizona. That's how far they put us away from the rest of it, because it was reported that no state in the Union would tolerate having a group like 20,000 black people with guns. And we had guns, we had weapons, we had to learn how to fire them. So we couldn't, there was no fort anywhere in the country would receive us. So we went to Fort Huachuca, Arizona, which was about 10 miles from the Mexican border, and that's where we were trained. Well, after training about 17 weeks, I was there until July, and I was trying to go overseas. And so nobody ever said anything to us where we were going. We just said, get on the train. And we got on this troop train and traveled from Fort Huachuca, Arizona, up to Hampton Roads, Virginia. And as the train traveled through the South, the residents of the South came out and threw all kinds of trash at us, and we couldn't go to the we didn't get off the train until we got far into the outskirts, and then we could get off the train if necessary to relieve ourselves or just to get a little fresh air. But they wouldn't let us off the train traveling through the South and we got to Hampton Roads in Virginia to board a ship. We had no idea where we were going. Nobody ever told us where we were going. So we got on this troop ship. Mariposa was called. I'll never forget that either. The Mariposa, to sail across the ocean. And we did. And I was an officer. And I was a battalion S2 of the 2nd Battalion. And it took us 2 weeks to travel because it was zigzagging, trying to avoid the German U-boats. And we escaped some close calls a couple of times, but we escaped those U-boats. And about 7 days out, they called all the officers together, junior officers, we were all junior. There was no black man above the rank of second lieutenant or first lieutenant in the 92nd at that time. And so they told us we were start having to study Italian. We said, study Italian. We didn't know what was going on here. We were on our way to Italy. We didn't know it till we were halfway across the ocean. And then they gave us these Italian English dictionaries. And I started trying to study Italian 2 weeks from landing in Italy to be able to speak it.
Oh my
But
gosh.
we managed. And got to Italy, got off the boat, and went to, this was at King's Hunting Grounds in the end near the end of the boot in Italy. Then we traveled from there up to Viareggio. No, to Pisa. We were there at the King's Hunting Grounds for about 2 weeks, training, getting accustomed to things, and trying to understand the language as we could. And then finally, they told me, we're going to battle. Going to battle? Wait a minute, what are you talking about? We're going to battle. And we started planning our deaths and benefits and all that sort of stuff. But one thing that happened that was very, very wonderful. Mark Clark, who was commanding the Fifth Army, and the Fifth Army was composed of the 88th Infantry Division on our right flank. There was a Buffalo Soldiers 370th Infantry Division. Then on our left flank was the 442nd Division, or the Nisei. They were the Japanese soldiers. And you know what? They were in the same exciting era as we were. They had been all rounded up and put in jail and stuff like that. And so those who were not put away, they put them in the army. And so these Japanese soldiers were going to prove how loyal they were to America, and they fought. They were the best fighting group in all of Italy. The 92nd Infantry Division, we had to cross the Arno River. I guess you all think I'm kind of a nut, but I guess I am, because I'd gone down. The soldiers have been down there displayed all along the banks of the Arno River, just north of Pisa. We were going to cross the banks, across the river to get to Lucca and free that town. But so that night, we went into the line, and before that, Mark Clark came up and said, he inspected the troop. We were all standing in attention. We were all dressed up, ready to go. And he looked at the commanders of these companies and said, well, these men are still first lieutenants. What's wrong with that? And they didn't say anything. He said, why aren't they captain? Well, nobody had an answer. So Mark Clark asked his aide-de-camp to give him some bars, and he put captain's bars on all of those officers who commanded those companies. And boy, that sort of saw we were ready to go out and tear up the Germans that time. Nobody had ever treated us this well before. Mark Clark says, make them captains. So we're ready to go. And that night, I went down and inspected the troops and came back, reported to the commanding officer that we were already all set to go. When would the artillery begin? Now, I learned this in officer candidate school, that when you're going to attack something across a river like that, you're supposed to send over guns. You're supposed to send over these shells to loosen up the area. And I was waiting for bombardment on the other side of the Arno River. And I said, when is it going to start? And the Colonel Betcher, he was a commander of the 307th Combat Team. He said, there's not going to be a bombardment. And I looked at him incredulously and said, what do you mean there's not going to be a bombardment? Don't you know these people are going to their death? Don't you know they're going to? And I walked up and down and read up and told them, this was not right. This is not right. You can't do, you got to. This is what I learned. This is what I learned in officer candidate school. But now we're in battle. So I said to him in a loud voice, who gave that order? He says, Mark Clark, commander of the Fifth Army. I said, get me Mark Clark on the telephone. I was kind of nuts. I didn't realize how that, but I was really, and then I packed up my bag, went down to the front line and talked to my buddies down there commanding. I said, look, guys, they're not going to start them with Mark. We got to go ourselves. So I jumped in the river there and started wading across, and nobody was following me. Yeah, they couldn't talk loud because you don't want the Germans to know you're coming. But the moon was out there showing just like you wouldn't believe it. So I got out there. I said, "Look, let's go." I called the chaplain, and he and I went out there. We're going to lead this reconnaissance force across the river. And I'm out there going like mad. And I got halfway across the river. The water was about shoulder deep. And all of a sudden, I realized I didn't know how to swim. I was halfway across this river. But I was so excited and so involved in this that I came back, reported to the commanding officer that there were no enemy over there. And they said, "Okay, Bob, you, Mr. Madison, Lieutenant Madison, you're commanding the first platoon now." So they took me off of the S2 position and sent me down to the front line I was commanding the first platoon of the 370th Combat Team, Third Army. Next question. I hope that's okay.
Absolutely. And during your time there in Italy, in your service to our country, and by the way, thank you for your service to our country. You were awarded the Purple Heart, and when you came back from Italy, you returned home to Cleveland so you could resume your education, and you headed to the School of Architecture at Western Reserve University. What would you like to share about your time at CWRU?
I'd like to share a little bit, but I want to get back to Italy first because we fought, and about three times I was almost killed. I should be dead now. I mean, I got to tell you, you don't know what I went through. But for example, I had my troops. Oh yeah, this is important. We regrouped after crossing the river. Some people got landmines. Some of them got their feet burned off. But we marched through Lucca in drill command style. And boy, when you get black soldiers marching, they can march. All the people came out and cheered us in Lucca. These are the Italians. They cheered us, and we thought about what it was like driving through Alabama and Louisiana and Georgia in America when they were throwing rocks at us. And here we in Italy, they're cheering us. Well, several times I was almost killed. I mentioned that. But the time that I really would like to recall is the fact that, I've been blessed. I mean, I've been blessed. I've been lucky, or whatever you want to call it. But I've been given several jobs, and one job I was given was battalion motor officer. I had to command all the motor. I was burial officer once. That was the worst job I ever had because it was my job to notify families that their loved ones had been killed. But this was I was motor officer. But this time we were attacking. We went up to the Circular Valley. The Circular Valley in Italy is about it's like from Cleveland to Pittsburgh. The Circular Valley was from Lucca, about that distance. And I had an appointment, rendezvous with the commanding officer at 11 a.m. on the day after Christmas, 26th of December, 1944. And I went to go wake up my driver, and he'd been, enjoying Christmas too much, so he was in no condition to drive. So I drive the Jeep. So I had gone to my rendezvous. I got in this Jeep and started driving, and up this mountain road in the Circular Valley, and Germans saw me, and they fired, and the shell hit the Jeep on the right side, and blew me out up against the mountain, and the Jeep went tumbling down into the valley and crushed itself. Some soldiers about 100 yards up saw this, came by, picked me up, took me to battalion aid station where they worked on me, and then at night I went to the hospital at Civitavecchia. Well, and they took the shrapnel out of my body and sewed up my foot, which was almost gone. And I was able to recuperate and get back together again, and went back to the Army, and went back to the front. And then a couple of months later in May, the war was over. And I was over there for another time. But uh, you will get back to West Case Western Reserve University, I'm sure of that. But anyway, uh, you know, I got to finish this story because 3 months, 3 years, 30 years, every Christmas I would get sick. I just didn't have. So my friend Charlie DeLeon, who was a psychiatrist, lived next door to me. I said, we got to take care of this. We got to find out what's wrong with you, Bob. And he told me to go back and think about what happened. As I recall, this is what came to mind. If my driver of the Jeep had been driving the Jeep, I would have been sitting in the seat that was blown away. If the outpost, excuse me, outpost, which is about 100 yards up, had not seen this, I would have bled to death because I couldn't. My foot was gone. I couldn't go up that hill at the mountain road, and so they saved me. And so if I'd been in the driver's seat, I'd been killed. If the outpost had not been there, I'd been killed, died. And if they had missed me, and I kept on up the hill, I would have been killed with the rest of the troops. So those circumstances left me to believe there must have been something there. I began to think about my religion, and they talked about, yeah, though I walked through the valley of the shadow of death. I said, yeah, I walked through the valley of circular valley. So I got to get back to reserve now. I'm sorry, but I didn't. That's a story that reminds me of where I came from. At Case Western Reserve University, after I came back. Excuse me. The thing about the war, though, it's important. I got a GI Bill of Rights, and the GI Bill of Rights is what allowed soldiers to get an education by being able to apply for the funds. And so I said didn't have to go back to Howard University anymore. I got the GI Bill of Rights. I had two brothers at Howard at the same time anyway. Julian was there, and Stanley was there, and Bernard was on his way. So I decided to go to Western Reserve University. I had the GI Bill of Rights. And I went up there, I called on the dean and said, I wanted to come and study architecture. And he said, oh, sure, come on up. We'd be happy to have you up here. So I got up the next day and went up to the School of Architecture. And the minute I opened the door, he looked at me and said, you Robert Madison? I said, yeah. He said, well, that must have been a mistake, but you can't come in here. We never had a colored boy finish the school before, and I doubt we ever will. So I said, okay, well, I left. And then I don't like to take no for an answer. So I put on my uniform with my combat ribbons and my Purple Heart and all that, and went back up to the school to talk to the Dean of Admissions. And I told the Dean of Admissions, my brother's on the battle on the soil of Italy, fighting to make this country safe again. And I want to enter the school. Don't tell me I can't enter the School of Architecture. So he thought about, well, they said, okay, we'll give us some exams. So they gave me an examination every Saturday from June to September. Anything. No one, just gave me an examination. I took it. Then they finally called me and said, you admitted. So I went to Western Reserve University, and I was very happy to be there. And Dean was out beside himself because he didn't know what to say then. They let me in. The first thing they did was give me physics. Physics was the flunker outer course. That's what you're supposed to do. And I remember that the professor, we'd come there in September. He'd go to the blackboard and start lecturing, and he'd go all across the blackboard and back again, day after day, week after week. And about the second month, all of a sudden he says, now I want to have one of the students come up and continue this formula. Madison, would you come up? Call me. Nobody else before ever had they call me. So I went to they wanted me to make a nut of myself, but I studied that night before, fortunately, and I was ready for it. So he gave me this formula, and I started at one end of the blackboard and went all the way across the blackboard. He said, "Thank you, Mr. Madison." I have never heard from him again. Then one other time, they wanted to get rid of me. They just it was just not right. So I had a class in specification writing, which is very, very precise and very distinctive. And Emil Zendi was his name. He was a professor talking about specifications. And I remember in this lecture, he was talking about how difficult it is to compare materials, and materials have to be so specified. And this is a real nigger in the wood patch. And I heard that, and I stopped. I said, I just couldn't believe this. I couldn't believe this. He said, "Yeah, it's a real nigger in the wood patch." So I said, "Okay, they want me to get up and act, number one, walk out, throw something at him, or do something." I said, "No, I'm not going to do that." So I sat there for the rest of that lecture and didn't hear a word, just seethed. But I got up and left, and I passed this course and went on. But the time when it really important was at the end of the first year. I was supposed to be graduating 2 more years, and so they said that that was going to be the senior class party. And I said, "Well, I've never been to these things before. I might as well go." So I paid my $25 and said, "I'm going to go to the senior class picnic for the graduating seniors. Only 2 of them were graduating." And I said, "I'm not going in the morning because they have swimming and golf and tennis and badminton and horseback. This is Lakeshore Country Club, now called Shelby, Lakeshore Country Club." But I got there and went over there, and I came in the front door, and everybody looked at me like, "Who is this guy?" He said, "The kitchen." I said, "I'm not going to the kitchen." "No, the kitchen." I said, "I'm not going to the kitchen. I came into the park." So finally, the manager of the country club came out and said, "I want to see you in the manager's office." So okay, I was expecting this. And when I got in the manager's office, there was the dean of the School of Architecture, about 4 students, about 10 members of the club, Lakeshore Country Club, the manager, and me. And this is a true story. When I got in, he said, "Well, Bob Madison, we want to thank you for coming here, and thank you. I want you to understand, some of my best friends are colored people, like Jesse Owens and Joe Lewis. I like those people. They're great people. They're good people." I said, "Yeah, it's fine." He said, "As much as we'd like to, you can't eat here. We don't allow colored people to eat in the dining room with other people, other white people." So I was trying to figure out how would I answer. He says, "Now, we can you can eat in the kitchen with the help, or we can give you a doggy bag and you can take it home, or we can refund you your money. What do you want to do?" And I sat there and just sort of act like I didn't know what he's talking about, very dumb. And slowly there arose a young man from the back row who came up behind all the people, came up to stood beside me and said, "If Bob doesn't eat here, I don't eat here. And if I don't eat here, nobody eats here, because I'm the treasurer and I got the money." And so he thought about it for 15 or 20 minutes and said, "Okay, Mr. Madison, you can eat here, but not Mr. Madison. Okay, Madison, you can eat here, but you shouldn't stay for the dance." Say, "Well, I didn't bring a date, so it didn't matter to me, but I did eat in the dining room of the Lakeshore Country Club." And what was funny, all the waiters were colored people, and boy, they came out, they served me like I was some kind of a kid. I was embarrassed because they were showing off. But that was so then what happened though, the dean was absolutely annoyed. I was nothing but a troublemaker. All I did was make trouble. So they decided they had to get rid of me. So I'm told they had a faculty meeting on Monday. This is Friday. Friday was this party. Saturday was the party. They had a faculty meeting on Monday, and they came to the conclusion they had to get rid of him next year. Instead of coming 2 more years, no, 1 year, gonna get rid of him. So they decided to get rid of me and told me that I could take I took about 8 courses, usually it's about 5. 8 courses plus a thesis that year. That's okay, I did it. And I was also working part-time trying to get some money together. At any rate, yeah, I got through there and I got a degree and passed. And when I finished with, and I got my degree and was in there, the elder came back to the reception. As I was leaving, the dean said to me, "Okay, Madison, you going to work in a lumber yard?" I said, "No, dean, I'm going to be an architect." That really got to me, and I'm gonna show him. So I did start. Oh, I got, and they were right. They said, "There's no job for you. There's no job for colored people." So I went to the offices in Cleveland, and said, "Oh no, I'm sorry, but we don't hire colored people. We don't hire colored people." I went to about 5 offices, and then I said, "Wait a minute. I got to get a job working in order to get the qualification to take the state board examination to become an architect. I got to do it." I picked out Robert A. Little, who was a teacher at the university, and I went to his office unannounced. And I knocked on the door, and he said, "Oh, hi, how are you?" I said, "I'm fine." I said, "I'll work for you for 2 weeks for nothing. And then if I'm okay, then you can hire me." So he said, "Come on in." So I went in there and I started talking to him a couple of times, about 5, 10 minutes. And he said, "I'll let you know." So I went home. And a week later, he called me back and told me in another week I could come to work. And I did. And I found out that he had to ask. This is 1303 Prospect Avenue. The building is still there. And I go by often and look at it because I was able to go into the building and work. But back in those days, restaurants didn't feed black people. So I brought the other members of the staff who were all white. They went out to lunch at the restaurant, and I brought my lunch. And then later on, one of the guys said that Bob is by himself. He brought his lunch, so I would eat lunch in the office. Bring my bag, but eat lunch there. And that was then I left Western Reserve University, got a degree, graduated. What I did, I fooled them because they said, "Oh, I told you, the dean says you're gonna work at Lumberyard Nine with me." I studied. I got married to Leatrice, and she's first class. She said, "We're gonna study for this." So he says I started studying every day after dinner for the state board examination. And I graduated in 48. In 1950, I was ready. Went down there. You have to go to Columbus 5 days, and you took an exam, 2 exams every day from 8 o'clock in the morning to 6, and on Tuesday, 8 o'clock to 8 o'clock. That was the design problem. So for the 5 days, I took this examination, and sure enough, about 3 months later, all of a sudden, Leatrice showed up in the office, and she came in with holding this letter up high to tell me I had passed the state board examination. Well, this had not been done before. Robert A. Little, who was the owner of the firm, was so excited, he ordered cigars and cognac to celebrate Bob Madison passed the state board examination on the first try. So that was how I got to reserve, and I did graduate, and I then was appointed to the board of trustees and stuff like that. I hope I answered that question because I'm just talking.
It was a wonderful story, and I appreciate you sharing it with us, Mr.
Well, I'm just talking,
So I know we're kind of running a little short on time, so I'd like to ask you one more question before I go to some questions that that our guests submitted. So I think just kind of jumping to present day, I think no one joining us today or listening to the recording will ever forget 2020. It was a time of great loss and chaos, not just for the U.S. but the world. The COVID-19 pandemic played a huge role in what made 2020 so memorable. However, equally as concerning, a virus of racism and bigotry cut short many lives, such as those of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. You've experienced racism and had friends that were at the forefront of the civil rights movement. What, in your opinion, will help to change the direction of our country Does it come from education? Is there a way that architecture can help make an impact on that?
If I knew the answer to that, I would be happy to share it with you. I don't have an answer for that, but I can only say this to you that it is sad, and I've been in places where I've been received by. It happens that I'm a pretty good architect. I have to admit that. So, but I took them on, and I became the president of the Cleveland chapter of the AIA, and then I was elected to the College of Fellows. That's the highest honor you can get as an architect, except the gold medal. Only one of them is given a year. But when I was elected to the chairman of the jury of fellows, I think it was then that I felt that I had made it as an architect. You can't get any higher than a fellow. That's the highest honor they can be bestowed, except the gold medal. So I think that my practice was an effort to try to let people know that we can do as anything anybody else can do. And I think you have to get out there and try it. I will never forget this. In Worcester, Ohio, for some reason, they sent out an RFP for architects who wanted to apply to do the correctional center at Worcester, as well as some other meetings. So I submitted my credentials to Worcester, Ohio, and finally they admitted me to come down for an interview. And I just said, okay, I'm going out. Well, I'm wasting my time going out. These people going to hire me. They didn't have black people anywhere in this place. So I went down to Worcester, Ohio, and I performed. I showed them my work, and I was very respectful of them and gracious and stuff like that. And sure enough, they called me up and said, Mr. Madison, we'd like you to be our architect. Well, that was the beginning of my belief that there was some fairness in this world. Because, as I said before, Worcester, Ohio was not a place where you expect to see many people who were of color. And the officials of that town selected me, and they had most of the big architects from the state of Ohio applying for this job. And they selected me, and I was grateful. So we put all out into that, and we got a design award for the building we designed in Worcester. But not only that, that was for the Justice Department. Then the city of Worcester mayor's office invited me to submit my credentials to do the community building, and I got that. Then the county asked me to do the administration building for the county, and I did 3 major buildings in Worcester, Ohio. Beautiful, I love them, great, wonderful. But I think that what happened, in response to your question, these were unusual circumstances. I think these were unusual people. These were people who didn't have some of the foibles of others about class and about this and that and the other. And I was treated very well, and I respected them, and they respected me, and I did a job, and they hired me for 3 major projects in the city of Worcester. And I did it. They were good buildings too. I still like them. But in answer to your question, because architecture is such an interesting field that you don't have to touch people. You don't have to, all you gotta do is do your work in your office and show them a model. I mean, in effect, a little bit more than that, but essentially, unlike being a doctor where you got to, or being a lawyer, or being some of the other things where you really have some contact with people. The only contact we had with people was that they hired us, and they signed a contract. We drew lines on paper, and we supervised the construction of the building going up, and that was it. I, I, I've been around. I think that when I was in Italy and learned and began to enjoy opera as they do in Italy, and I came back and I lived in a kind of a world that opera people are pretty open. They love Aida, they love Macbeth, and the operas are about all kinds of people. And I think the opera lovers are people who understand humanity and realize that you got the Hunchback of Notre Dame, you got all kinds of people in opera. And I am an opera lover, and I think that the experience of that and the contact with these people who enjoy good music, even though it comes from circumstances which may not be of the best, it happens. But I must say to you that I live in a little world. I've gotten all kinds of awards, but I realize it's because I have a unique life. But I look around and see that some of my brothers are treated very badly. But I think that the only thing we have to keep on trying. We have to keep on trying. When America reaches its zenith, it's glorious. And it is. I mean, I've been in Italy. I've been in China. I've been in France. I've been all over. And we're trying to do it. Your question is, when will it happen? I don't know. But I think that the period we're in right now is farther than we've ever been. It's funny, though, because I was thinking to somebody the other day that when Carl Stokes was elected mayor of the city of Cleveland, for me, I thought that was a turning point. I thought Carl Stokes' election was the thing that began to realize that people of all walks of life could accept him. People talk about Barack Obama, and there's no question he was a president, but it wasn't like Carl Stokes. When Carl Stokes was elected mayor, that was a world changer. Yes, Barack Obama, and yes, the lady who's now vice president have achieved those honors, and I'm grateful for that. But it wasn't like what Carl Stokes had done. I think that we're in the midst of a very serious crisis right now. And when it's over, if we prevail, it will be then begin to realize, well, let's go, let's do it. I don't have any answer. I suffer badly when I realize how people have been treated. I mean, I watched George Floyd, and I think for the first time in about 20 years, I really felt we hadn't made much progress. But then we made progress, but still we got a few people, like those people who tried to run out the Capitol the other day, are just diehards who want to change America and like make America great again, whatever all that means. But I know what it means in their mind. So I'm sorry I don't have an answer for you, but I've been out there. I've fought the battles. I've done my best. I've tried to say we can do as well as anybody else. When I was chairman of the jury of fellows of the IRA, I was the only black person there. And I ran the jury, and we selected the president, and I was the one who put the medal around their necks when they were elected in the College of Fellows in the convention in Los Angeles. So things are getting better, but we still have a long way to go. I hope that begins to answer something. I tried.
Certainly a very difficult question, and not one we'd answer here tonight, but I appreciate your insight, Mr. Madison. I really do. So I would again like to thank you for taking the time to talk with us about your memoir. It's been an absolute privilege to read your life story and then discuss it here with you today. Now, before I do take a couple of questions from the audience, I would like to mention a couple of items. Mr. Madison has chosen a CWRU fund, which he has personally supported and would like you to consider supporting as well. The Diversity Champion Annual Fund. This fund supports programs of the Office of Inclusion, Diversity, and Equal Opportunity, which includes the Trailblazers Project, Train the Champion, and many more. This is a link that's actually right here above me, the bit.ly/diversity champion. And if any amount that you're able to donate makes a huge impact. And it's something that Mr. Madison has personally chosen to share with you tonight. Also, there is a forthcoming children's book inspired by the many trials and triumphs in the life of Robert P. Madison. The Building Brothers is above all else a celebration of family. The lesson our youth earned in the Building Brothers, you build a living through education, superior skills, and hard work, but you build a life by appreciating, loving, and forgiving your family along the way. Building Brothers is a unique creative collaboration between Act 3 Creative and a community of writers, librarians, and illustrators to bring the story of the Madison family to life. For more information, you can contact James O'Hare at james@act3creative.com. I'd like to thank Jim and his team for connecting me with Mr. Madison to make today possible. Courtesy of Mr. Madison and Act 3 Creative, we had mentioned that there will be anyone who had attended will be able to get a book plate personally inscribed by Designing Victory, and to put into your copy of Designing Victory. And our guest who shared where they're from, the person who joined us from the furthest distance away from campus will get a personalized inscribed copy of Designing Victory. And also forthcoming is a feature of Mr. Robert P. Madison at the Linsalata Alumni Center on Case Western Reserve's campus. Keep an eye out for a possible future virtual tour of that exhibit, which will be presented by the Alumni Association of Case Western Reserve University and curated by Kathy Berry. Mr. Madison, I'd like to just share a couple of comments that people have shared in the chat while we were going through. Vincent Holland said, "Thank you for your service and sharing your experience with us. How blessed we are to hear from history, Mr. Madison. It is time to learn this important lesson in history from someone who lived it. You're an amazing human being. I'm pleased that my alma mater is hosting this event. Dr. Mobley, who is here with us from Beechwood, Ohio, and a faculty member in English at CWRU. Kelly Grigsby Jones would like to say thank you for your service and sharing your experience with us. And one of the questions that did come in was, what architecture project are you most proud of, and how did you get it?
First of all, thank you for that, for all those comments you did. I want to pay a special attention to Marilyn Mobley, who was instrumental in me making that contribution, and my good friend Jackson Wright and Doris Evans. I see their pictures, and I just want to thank them for coming. But the question was, now what was the question? I'm sorry. See, I'm old now, 97 years old, so my memory is not that long. But you were asking me about
which, someone had asked, which architecture project are you most proud of, and how did you get it?
That's a good question, and I think the one that I'm most proud of in all of my career has been the United States Embassy office building in Dakar, Senegal. And I say that for the following reason. First of all, this is early in my career, and I was really shocked when I was invited to come to Washington and present my credentials and to the jury. And the jury was composed of the Dean of Architecture at Harvard, Dean of Architecture at Cornell, and the Dean of Architecture at Yale. So these are pretty impressive people. Well, they accepted the fact that I was qualified to design the American Embassy in Dakar, Senegal. Now, that was an experience that I would never forget, and an experience which was very moving to me. I'd been in China, and I'd been in France, and I'd been in Italy and the Scandinavian countries, and did okay. But when I went to Dakar, and I walked down the street, nobody looked at me. All these other places, I was the only black boy walking the street. in their car. Everybody looked like me. Everybody was black. And that wasn't, you can't imagine what an unusual experience that is to, for so long, being able to go someplace and somebody, looks at you and hide children from you and all sorts of things. But here, nobody even took notice of me. I think that was number one. That was just the fact of feeling like I was home. And I speak French. At that time, I was speaking very fluently. And people thought I was from the Côte d'Ivoire. So I said, okay, I'm Côte d'Ivoire now. And I started dressing with my beret on, all that kind of stuff. I enjoyed that. That was kind of fun, It was fun. Then I met with the officials and the President Senghor, Leopold Senghor, he had studied in France. He was really very fluent in French. And I met with him, and then I met with other people. But one of the things which was very, absolutely incredible, was the fact that we met, on Monday. I got there on Tuesday, and Wednesday, Thursday, we had meetings with the people, and they wore neckties and suits, and just like me. On Friday, didn't go to work, and this is because this is a Muslim holy day. And I looked out the window of my balcony of my hotel room, and I saw this man out there whom I'd seen yesterday with a blue suit on and necktie. He had on a boo-boo and a fez and some slippers on his feet. And he had 5 women behind him, beautifully dressed, beautiful women. I said, those must be his wives. And they were his wives. I said, and here I am, left out again. But what happened, I enjoyed that. Not, they might look to me. So that on that, I worked all during the time I was there. But somebody said on Sunday, why don't you go to the Ile de Gorée? I said, yeah, I think I'll go to the Ile de Gorée. Ile de Gorée is an island just off the coast of Africa. I don't know if anybody's ever been there before, but I went to the Ile de Gorée, and when I got off the boat, and this is just an island with all kinds of houses, but at the end of the island was an enormous building. It looked like maybe the Pentagon or something like that kind of structure. And I approached it and went up to it, and then I went inside and I realized what was happening. On the first level was where the slaves were kept before shipment to the United States. On the upper levels of where the officers and where the white people stayed in keeping those people. And so I sat in that room and saw the whips on the walls, the iron shackles, I saw the chains and a dirt floor, and I saw all of that. And I got news for you. It touched me deeply. I sat down and I cried. About a half an hour to breathe. And one of my ancestors may have come from this place. And I thought about that for quite a bit. And I realized that, this was where we all started from. And I said, now, 400 years later, here I am, having lived in America, coming back to design an embassy building that will have the people who occupy the embassy representing America. And I, the black architect, going to come back and design a building in this city for those people who are now, 40 years later, my ancestors left there. So I have to say that whenever we ask me about the building I like, or feel touched to, I feel very close to that building. It's not only architecturally that I feel close to it, and its design and all that, but a sense of connection with who I am, who was before me, how they got here, and what I'm doing. So the building, and it's a good building. Of course, they don't use it anymore because it was then after I designed it, people started breaking up members, and so they left it there, but they built somebody else built an embassy building, which was a fortress-like. Mine was not a fortress. It was a place that was inviting, welcoming people. But I'm glad I did it. And I really had it was about a 3-year period because we designed it. We had to have it reviewed and crossed back and forth. And See, they didn't have cranes like we have here. They carried they mixed the cement in a wheelbarrow, and they had people out there not with bulldozers but with shovels, shoveling the earth. But they did it, and beautiful they were. So it was an experience that I will never forget. Thank you for asking about that.
And I was just made aware that there was some people have some trouble with the link for the Diversity Champion Fund. When you put in it actually needs to be capitalized. So it's bit.ly/diversity champion, and diversity is capitalized and champion is capitalized, but the rest of it is not. I've put it in the chat for you so that you can access that. My apologies for the confusion on that. And I'll end with this last question, Mr. Madison. Could you please comment on the impact your career and stellar accomplishments have had on attracting others of color to become architects? And they also mentioned congratulations on a fabulous life and career.
Well, thank you for that question. I think what really is exciting to me is the younger number of Black people I've employed. And you see, you had to have work in an architect's office to become registered. So prior to my being there, when Black students studied architecture and came out, like they said to me, we don't have colored people. So I was able to employ these people, and about 200 of them. And they went on to establish themselves as professional architects. And I feel very grateful for the numbers of people that I've had a chance to work with and study and help and become architects. I wish there were more. And I think there will be more, when they get through playing, saturating it with basketball, football, and baseball, maybe they'll come over and do some architecture. They have enough lawyers, enough doctors. I'm talking to my friends now. They know what I'm talking about. But architects would need more people, yeah. Sensitivity to being something very special. I lost their pictures. Where are they? Gone?
The pictures, I think just because we've spotlighted you, I think is all.
Oh, okay. Well, I hope I was able to give you some thoughts about where I came from and what I've done. I've enjoyed this very much, and I'm grateful to you for inviting me to do it, especially my alma mater and all these good folks. Don't know Jackson Wright Smile over in Doris Evans. I know them people. Marilyn, I know them all. How you doing? Good to see you. Thank you for coming. Good to see you, Bob Brown. Yeah. Good, Mary. Okay, so whatever you want me to do, I'll do it. I'm enjoying this.
All right. Well, thank you very much. And just to kind of share a couple of additional thoughts that everyone has, they said, thank you. Kenneth Chance had said, thank you for sharing your extraordinary life and times.
Is Chance here?
Kenneth Chance.
Yeah. Ken Chance?
Yep.
Is he there?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
You're wonderful and amazing as always.
Hi, Ken. How you doing? Good to hear from you. Good to hear you there. Okay, I'm sorry. Didn't mean to interrupt.
No, not a problem. But thank you again very much, Mr. Madison. And I'll just leave it with the statement from Vera Perkins Hughes. She said, Mr. Madison, I loved reading your memoir. By hearing you speak about it tonight with my 8-year-old grandson, and his questions as you spoke was a thrilling experience. Thank you.
Well, I'm grateful. I thank you for listening to it too.
Well, again, thank you all for joining us this evening. Again, as I mentioned, keep an eye out for a potential children's book coming down very soon, hopefully. The Building Brothers.
Yeah.
And hopefully we'll have an opportunity to do a virtual tour of Mr. Madison's exhibit at the Ensalada Alumni Center in the not too distant future. And we'd love to see all the different pieces of your life that we'll be able to exhibit there. So again, thank you all for joining us. We really appreciate it. And we look forward to you joining us for our next Blue Book Club book discussion. Thank you.
Thank you all too. I'm grateful for this opportunity. Thank you. Hey, Jackson, right there. Hey. Bye-bye.